Millionaire playboy Julian Vance didn't do compromises. Ice in his veins, a shark's smile. That was Julian. He built a Wall Street empire. No help needed, no feelings allowed. But this morning, his world tilted. His grandfather, George, patriarch of the Vance dynasty, was fading fast. The family lawyer dropped a bombshell. To inherit everything, Julian had to be married. Married? Julian scoffed, pacing his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. Marriage was for sentimental fools, a business liability. The will is explicit, the lawyer droned. Your grandfather's wish. A legal marriage before he passes. He wants to give his blessing. It's about family honor, Julian. Honor? Julian ran a hand through his expensively tousled hair. George, bless his old-fashioned heart, still clung to love and family. To Julian, it was a quaint relic. But the inheritance, it was the fuel for his ambitions, the bedrock of his power. He spent the day in a furious mental battle. Marriage, absurd. Yet, the image of George, frail in his hospital bed, haunted him. He needed that inheritance. A solution, a loophole, a way out of this archaic demand. The next morning, after a sleepless night wrestling with the ridiculousness of it all, Julian needed coffee. He ducked into his usual spot, a cozy little cafe downtown. The daily grind, hoping caffeine and the city's chaotic energy would spark an idea. He saw Chloe, the cafe owner, looking defeated, pinning a closed sign to the door. "Chloe? Closing for good?" Julian asked, surprised. He knew her, a quick nod, a morning greeting. She turned, exhaustion etched on her face. "No choice, Julian. Bills are crushing me. The cafe, my dream. Looks like dreams don't pay rent in this city." Her voice cracked. Julian watched her, a flicker of calculation in his cold eyes. Chloe, independent, struggling, and right here. An idea, audacious and cynical, began to form. "What if," Julian began, his voice low, measured, "there was a way to keep this place open?" Chloe's head snapped up, a spark of desperate hope in her weary eyes. "What do you mean?" "I need something. You need money." Julian leaned closer, the hum of the cafe fading into the background. "Maybe we can help each other." Intrigue replaced despair in Chloe's expression. Julian held her gaze, unwavering. He had a plan, audacious, perhaps outrageous, but it could solve everything. And Chloe, she might just be desperate enough to play along. Julian knew his proposal was insane, a Manhattan madness, but time was ticking. George's image, weak yet expectant, flashed in his mind. This deal, this crazy bargain, could be the answer for both of them. "Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "what I'm about to ask, it's out there. Think about it before you answer. Think about what's possible." Her eyebrows arched, curiosity warring with caution. "I'm listening," she said, arms crossed, a fragile defiance in her stance. "I need a wife," Julian blurted out, watching her reaction like a hawk. Chloe blinked, then laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Excuse me, did I miss something in my caffeine intake this morning?" "You heard me," Julian confirmed, his voice sharp. "My grandfather, the inheritance. He demands I marry to inherit. Otherwise, everything I've built, everything planned, gone. It's his condition. I have to fulfill it." He saw her stunned silence, rush to clarify, but not a real marriage, an agreement, temporary. Chloe shook her head, trying to process his words. "So, you want to marry me? Fake marry me for an inheritance?" "Basically, yes. Look, it's a contract, Chloe, a business arrangement. It solves both our problems. You get the money to erase your debt, keep the cafe thriving. In return, you play a role." She crossed her arms tighter, considering weighing the insane proposition. "What happens after this marriage ends?" Her voice was firmer now, suspicion laced through it. "Grandfather passes, we annul the marriage. Clean, discreet, no strings, no feelings, just business." Julian laid it all out, cold, pragmatic. Chloe looked around the cafe, her gaze lingering on the worn tables, the espresso machine, the faded posters. Years of sweat, dreams poured into this small space. She knew the proposal was tempting, a lifeline. But something about Julian's detached calculation chilled her. She was a woman of heart, of passion. This felt wrong. "This is surreal," she breathed, looking back at Julian, her expression thoughtful. "But it would save my cafe." Julian nodded, seeing the flicker of possibility in her eyes. "Exactly. A transaction, Chloe. You help me, I help you. Nothing more." Silence hung heavy, thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of the decision. Chloe seemed lost in thought. picturing the implications, the risks, the potential rewards. She imagined the cafe thriving, the bills paid, the stress lifted. For the first time in months, hope flickered. Finally, she looked up, a sigh escaping her lips. "If it saves my dream," she said softly. Then with more steel, "Okay, I agree." Julian felt a surge of relief, a cold satisfaction. He had his solution. The plan was in motion. Now, he just had to make it convincing, and keep it strictly business, he hoped. The next afternoon, Chloe stood awkwardly in Julian's office, a glass and steel monument high above the city. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking, but Chloe felt dizzy, out of place in this world of power and polished surfaces. Julian, however, was in his element. He gestured to a thick document on his mahogany desk. "The agreement," he stated, his voice crisp, businesslike, "covers everything. Temporary marriage, no emotional attachment, substantial financial compensation upon fulfillment of the will's clause. Then we go our separate ways." Chloe stared at the contract, pages of legal jargon blurring before her eyes. "And what exactly do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Civil ceremony at City Hall. Attend a few events as a couple. That's it. We're husband and wife in name only for appearances." Julian tried to simplify, to strip away the absurdity of it all. Chloe nodded slowly, a knot tightening in her stomach. This was really happening, signing a contract to marry a man she barely knew. To fake a life. For the cafe. She took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed her name. Chloe Evans, soon to be Chloe Vance. On paper, anyway. Julian allowed himself a small, tight smile. "Excellent. We're partners now." The City Hall wedding was a blur. Chloe wore a simple dress she'd found on sale, Julian, a suit that probably cost more than her rent. The contrast was stark, yet to the few onlookers, they might have seemed like any young couple in the city, rushing through a civil ceremony. No vows of love, no lingering glances, just a quick exchange of legalities. When the officiant declared them married, Julian offered a curt handshake. George, frail but determined, watched from a wheelchair in the back. He found Julian's coldness odd, unsettling. Afterward, Julian suggested a celebratory lunch, a charade for George's benefit. Chloe agreed, still reeling from the speed of it all. At the restaurant, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "So," Chloe said, finally breaking the silence, "we're officially married now." Julian gave a clipped nod, one step closer to our goals. She forced a smile, but it felt brittle. As pragmatic as she tried to be, the reality of it was sinking in. Married to Julian Vance, a stranger. Julian, sensing her discomfort, shifted gears. "Why a cafe?" he asked, his voice softening slightly, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. Chloe relaxed a fraction, a spark of passion igniting in her voice. "It's always been my dream, a place where people connect, feel at home, simple but real." Julian noticed the light in her eyes, the genuine enthusiasm, passion. Something utterly foreign in his own carefully constructed world of numbers and deals. He, who valued only results, was facing someone driven by a dream, a human connection. It was intriguing. "It's good to have something to fight for," he murmured, almost to himself. Chloe smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, the first he'd seen. "I guess we both do now, don't we?" He nodded, meeting her gaze, something shifting between them. For the first time, it felt less like a transaction, more complicated. As they left the restaurant, Julian offered her a ride. Driving through the city lights, he felt a strange disorientation. His meticulously controlled life had just veered off course. Looking at Chloe in the passenger seat, he knew this temporary union might have consequences neither of them could have predicted. The week that followed was a whirlwind of appearances. Chloe found herself thrust into Julian's world of galas, boardrooms, and whispered conversations. To Julian, it was all strategy, optics, ensuring the world, and most importantly, George, believed in their fabricated marriage. For Chloe, it was a dizzying performance, a constant tightrope walk of pretending. She felt like an imposter in Julian's world, a world of tailored suits and million-dollar deals. Meetings, events, dinners. The schedule was relentless. Chloe's constant presence beside Julian became a new normal, even for him. He tried to maintain his detached focus, but Chloe was a persistent disruption to his carefully crafted equilibrium. For Chloe, the forced proximity to Julian was a growing internal conflict. One morning, preparing for a crucial investor meeting at Vance Corp headquarters, Chloe watched Julian in his element. the controlled power, the effortless command of his empire. She found herself wondering about the man beneath the tailored suit, the ambition that fueled his relentless drive. "Have you always been this dedicated to work?" she asked casually as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. Julian met her gaze in the reflection, surprised by the question. "Always, work is everything. My grandfather always preached independence. Rely on no one. It's worked so far." Chloe offered a small, knowing smile. "Maybe life should be more than that, Julian. More than contracts and board meetings." Julian didn't respond immediately. Chloe's words, her values, always seemed to prick at something within him, forcing a reflection he resisted. An internal tug of war began, a desire to understand her perspective battling against his ingrained pragmatism. He felt a flicker of fear that delving too deep into her world would distract him from his meticulously laid plans. At the meeting, Chloe surprised him again. Despite her lack of corporate experience, her genuine warmth, her natural way with people charmed the investors. They were disarmed by her authenticity in Julian's polished, often sterile world. Unknowingly, Chloe was showing Julian that there were other ways to lead, to connect, a more human approach he'd never considered. Later that day, heading back to his office, Julian noticed Chloe was quiet, withdrawn, lost in thought. "Something wrong?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. She sighed, looking out the window at the city rushing by. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. This agreement, I needed the money, yes, but I don't know if I can keep this up, living something that's not real, for so long." Julian frowned, unease creeping in. He knew Chloe had reasons to feel this way, but her honesty unsettled him. He wasn't ready to confront the feelings her words stirred within him. "You agreed to the contract, Chloe, knowing the terms. A conscious choice." He kept his tone deliberately practical, detached. Chloe nodded, her expression still shadowed. "Yes, I know. It just doesn't feel so simple anymore. It's strange, faking something that, in a way, feels a little real." Julian had no immediate answer. He knew the contract was temporary, that Chloe wouldn't be a permanent fixture in his life. But hearing her words, something shifted within him. For the first time, he considered the possibility that this fake marriage had become more than just a business arrangement. For him, too. That night, alone in his penthouse, Julian replayed Chloe's words in his mind. He, the man who believed in cold, hard objectivity, was starting to question his own foundations. His controlled world felt, subtly, irrevocably, changed by her presence. Looking out at the glittering cityscape, a disquieting thought surfaced. Could this agreement be more than just a transaction? Julian and Chloe continued the charade, but the dynamic had subtly shifted. To the outside world, they were a couple, attending events, sharing polite smiles. But beneath the surface, something was stirring. Chloe, increasingly present in Julian's life, was chipping away at his carefully constructed walls, revealing a more human, less calculating side of the millionaire. A curiosity was sparked in him, an interest he couldn't entirely ignore. One weekend, Julian invited her to his Hamptons beach house. Not part of the contract, but he rationalized it as necessary for appearances, to build a more convincing image even for their inner circle. Chloe accepted, a flutter of unease in her chest. She knew she was getting too involved, blurring the lines of their agreement. The beach house was stunning, a secluded haven with panoramic ocean views. Chloe was captivated, lost in the beauty, a genuine, serene smile gracing her lips. Julian watched her, a strange intensity in his gaze. He was accustomed to luxury, to opulent properties, but for the first time it felt empty. Chloe's presence breathed life into the sterile perfection, making it feel new. "Do you ever get tired of places like this?" she asked, still gazing at the ocean, a touch of awe in her voice. "It's surreal. Honestly, it's been a long time since I stopped to actually enjoy it." He leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching the waves. "Usually I'm just thinking about the next deal, the next move." Chloe turned to him, a thoughtful curiosity in her eyes. "Sometimes, Julian, I think you forget to live." Julian chuckled, a rare, almost rueful sound. "Live? What does that mean to you, Chloe?" She smiled, a soft, reflective smile. "To me, living is moments like this, valuing what we have now, the people around us. I never had much money, but I always had my dreams, my people. That's enough." He watched her, fascinated by her simplicity, her sincerity. Chloe saw the world through a lens so different from his own, and her perspective, slowly, subtly, began to seep into his carefully constructed reality. They walked on the beach, talking for hours about their lives, their dreams, even fragments of their pasts. Chloe shared stories of her childhood, the struggles of launching the cafe. Julian, surprisingly, found himself revealing glimpses of his own life, things he'd never bothered to share with anyone. During the walk, Julian felt an unexpected ease beside her. Conversation flowed naturally, without the pressure of deals, contracts, or obligations. It was just him and Chloe, two people seemingly worlds apart, yet a connection, unexpected and undeniable, had taken root. Later, back at the house, the silence between them felt different, charged, heavy with unspoken tension. Neither seemed to know how to break it. Chloe sat on the sofa, watching Julian, an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, tenderness, a hint of vulnerability. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be, you know," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. He smiled faintly, surprised by her directness. "And what does that mean?" "It means you hide behind this wall, this calculated exterior. But there's more to you than that. I see it." Chloe hesitated, as if fearing she'd crossed a line. "And even though this is just a contract, I think I'm starting to like seeing the side of you that even you don't seem to know." Julian was speechless. Her honesty disarmed him, stirred something deep within. He felt a vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years, unsettling yet strangely compelling. He moved closer, sitting beside her, the space between them charged with unspoken emotion. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. This is temporary, you know that?" He said it more to himself than to her, as if needing to remind himself of the boundaries, to regain control. But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow, less certain. Chloe nodded, her eyes locked on his. "I know. But sometimes temporary can be significant too." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Julian realized, with a jolt, that this temporary alliance had transformed everything he thought he knew about love, about connection, and most terrifyingly, about himself. The following week, a charity gala, a glittering spectacle hosted by one of Julian's biggest business partners. Mandatory attendance for Julian and his wife. For Julian, these events were routine, a calculated part of the game. For Chloe, the prospect of navigating high society was anxiety-inducing. Gala night. Chloe in an elegant gown Julian had chosen, its simple lines highlighting her natural grace. As she approached him, ready to leave, Julian was momentarily speechless. She was radiant, her quiet confidence making her presence stand out in the opulent surroundings. "You look beautiful," he murmured, almost inaudibly, surprising himself. Chloe blushed, offering a shy smile as he offered his arm. On the way to the event, she was visibly nervous. Julian, noticing her unease, tried to reassure her. "Remember, we're in this together. Just be yourself." Chloe nodded, trying to quell her racing heart. Julian's presence was a strange mix of comfort and complication. He helped her navigate the fear, but his nearness ignited a different kind of anxiety, a growing emotional entanglement she was desperately trying to avoid. Yet, despite her best efforts to keep it strictly business, she found herself increasingly drawn to him, especially to the glimpses of vulnerability she'd glimpsed beneath his icy facade. At the venue, Julian's hand briefly covered hers, a silent gesture of support. Calculated, she knew, for appearances, yet the simple touch sent a jolt through her. Inside the ballroom, Julian introduced her to his partners, investors, the city's elite. Chloe surprised herself by actually enjoying the conversations, drawn into Julian's world, a world he'd always kept separate, now sharing, even if for a performance. Gradually, she relaxed, even found herself enjoying the evening. Later, in conversation with one of Julian's longtime investors, Mr. Barnes, Chloe noticed a shift in Julian's demeanor, a sudden rigidity she recognized as tension. Barnes, a close friend of George's, turned to Julian, a knowing look in his eyes. "Old George always had big dreams for you, Julian. He wanted you to find someone who truly valued you, someone to make you rethink your priorities." Barnes's gaze shifted to Chloe, a shrewd, appraising look. "And I must say, seeing you finally married to someone so charming is a great relief." Julian forced a smile, thanking him, but the weight of Barnes's words hung heavy. Chloe felt the tension radiating from him. Instinctively, she squeezed his hand, a silent offer of support. Barnes, catching the gesture, smiled with satisfaction and moved on. Alone, Julian exhaled, a mix of relief and discomfort. It's strange how everyone has an opinion about my life, he murmured. Chloe smiled gently. They just want the best for you, Julian. Your grandfather, Mr. Barnes, they care. Julian looked at her, and for the first time, Chloe saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. My grandfather always thought I was incomplete because of how I viewed life, relationships. He used to say success without someone to share it with is just emptiness. Chloe was silent, absorbing the weight of his words. She'd never imagined someone like Julian, who seemed to possess everything, could harbor such a deep-seated void. Suddenly, she understood. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about George's deeper wish for his grandson's happiness. Moving to a quieter corner of the room, Chloe, feeling a sudden urge to comfort him, murmured, Maybe he just wanted you to allow yourself to be happy, Julian, not for what you've achieved, but for who you are, what you feel. He looked at her, visibly moved. Her sincerity disarmed him. Despite his best efforts to maintain his carefully constructed barriers, Chloe saw through the facade. She saw the man beneath the businessman, a man burdened by expectations, by loneliness, and it forged a connection he hadn't anticipated, hadn't allowed himself to feel. Maybe you're right, he whispered, not breaking eye contact. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotion. The contract, the lie, seemed to dissolve, replaced by something more complex, more real. In that room, amidst the glittering crowd, Julian and Chloe were for the first time truly alone, and in the silence they both sensed their sham marriage morphing into something neither had foreseen. The unspoken question hung in the air: how far would this go? In the days after the gala, the atmosphere between Julian and Chloe shifted again, subtly, profoundly. The agreement had taken on a new weight, a significance they both avoided acknowledging, yet couldn't ignore. Chloe, increasingly invested, saw Julian's defenses crumbling, his struggle against burgeoning emotions. Then, a phone call shattered the fragile equilibrium. George's caretaker, voice tight with urgency, informed Julian his grandfather had been hospitalized again. A wave of cold fear washed over Julian, a fear he'd buried deep, the fear of losing the one person who, despite everything, was his anchor. Driven by a sudden urgency, Julian hesitated, then asked Chloe to come with him. I think my grandfather would want to see you. He's always been enthusiastic about this marriage, he said, his voice low, hesitant, as if revealing more than he intended. Chloe nodded, sensing his underlying tension. The drive to the hospital was silent, charged. Julian was lost in thought, Chloe observing him, seeing, in his profile, a depth of connection to his grandfather he'd always masked. At the hospital, Julian led her to George's room. Soft light filled the space. George, hearing their steps, slowly opened his eyes. Seeing them together, a weak but genuine smile lit his face. "Ah, my favorite couple," he said, his voice frail but warm. Chloe approached the bed, gently taking George's hand. She felt his fragility, but also a quiet strength, a knowing wisdom in his gaze. Looking at him, she understood. His affection for Julian wasn't just about the inheritance. It was a deep, heartfelt wish for his grandson to find true love. Julian, trying to maintain composure, met George's thoughtful gaze. "You seem tense, Julian. Is everything all right?" George asked, his voice laced with concern. Julian hesitated, then sighed, a weariness in his voice. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not the grandson you wanted me to be, like I'm failing you somehow." George's gaze softened, his grip on Julian's hand tightening. "All I ever wanted, Julian, was for you to find someone who could show you what truly matters. This marriage, I pushed for it because I thought it might give you that. Something beyond business, beyond money." George's words resonated deeply, a warmth spreading through Chloe. Until now, she'd seen the contract as a cold formality. But George, he saw something more. He wanted Julian to experience love, to understand the value of sharing his life. Julian lowered his head, visibly moved. I never understood your insistence before. Always thought you were stuck in old-fashioned ideas, sentimentality." He glanced at Chloe, a fleeting, almost vulnerable look. "But now I'm not so sure anymore." George chuckled softly, a knowing, understanding laugh. "Sometimes, all we need is a chance to see things differently." He turned his gaze to Chloe, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Chloe, you brought something I knew Julian needed. Thank you for that." Chloe's eyes welled up, moved by George's kindness. But with the gratitude came a wave of guilt, George believed. He believed in their fake marriage, saw it as something real. Unease gnawed at her. The lie was growing, suffocating. After a long conversation, Julian and Chloe said their goodbyes. George watched them leave, his gaze serene, as if he sensed the real emotions beneath the facade. Little did he know the comforting illusion he held was about to shatter. In the hospital parking lot, silence hung heavy. Chloe could no longer contain the truth. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling. "Your grandfather, he believes in this marriage. He really thinks we're for real." Julian stopped, his silence heavy with the weight of that revelation. "I know, and it's bothering me. He thinks I found what he always wanted for me, and part of me wants to honor that. But another part knows we're living a lie." Chloe felt a pang of sadness, of anguish. "Julian, he just wants you to be happy, and maybe without realizing it, you're closer to that than you think." Julian sighed, his gaze distant. "This agreement, Chloe, it changed something in me. Maybe in you too." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a confusing mix of emotions. Chloe met his gaze, the conflict within her raging. She knew the truth had to come out, but feared the devastation it would cause George. She sensed their next encounter with him would be decisive. After Julian and Chloe's hospital visit, George's suspicions deepened. Something in their interaction felt off. He knew Julian, his grandson, the man of ice and ambition. This sudden transformation seemed too convenient, too theatrical. George decided to investigate. Days later, the truth landed like a punch to the gut. The investigator's report confirmed his worst fears. Julian and Chloe's marriage was a sham, a carefully orchestrated deception to fulfill the will's clause and secure the inheritance. To George, it was more than a lie. It was a betrayal. He, who had raised Julian on principles of honesty and integrity, couldn't fathom such cold calculation from his own grandson. Heartbroken, disillusioned, George summoned Julian for one final confrontation. Julian arrived at the hospital, a somber expression on his face, the usual guarded smile absent. George's ice gaze met his, a wave of disappointment washing over Julian, constricting his chest. Without preamble, George began, his voice stronger than Julian expected. "Julian," he said, each word sharp with pain, "I had your marriage to Chloe investigated." Julian froze, a chill spreading through him. He tried to maintain his composure, but George's words were a physical blow. Before he could speak, George continued, "How could you do this to me, Julian?" The raw pain in his voice shattered Julian's defenses. "All I ever wanted was for you to find someone who made you happy, someone to show you life isn't just numbers and contracts. The clause in my will, it was meant to help you become a more human person, happier. Instead, you deceived me. Made me believe this marriage was real." Julian lowered his head, unable to meet his grandfather's heartbroken gaze. Shame washed over him, heavy and suffocating. He had betrayed the one person who had ever truly cared. I only did it because of the inheritance, Grandpa, to keep the company going, the projects." His voice trailed off, weak, unconvincing. "I thought that was what mattered most to you." George shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "What I wanted, Julian, was to see you live, to see you love and be loved. You've always been so solitary, so closed off. I just wanted you to see there's more to life than business and numbers. But with this lie, you failed me, Julian." Julian felt the words pierce him, sharper than any business failure. He had never understood the depth of his grandfather's wish, that the inheritance wasn't about money, but about something far more profound. George took a deep, ragged breath, fighting for composure. "Because of this, Julian," he continued, his voice trembling, "you won't receive the inheritance. I'd rather it go to causes that truly promote human value. Someone who could do what you did doesn't deserve our family's legacy." Julian remained silent, no argument, no protest. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he deserved this. That night, leaving the hospital, Julian drove straight to Chloe's apartment. He knocked, his heart heavy. When she opened the door, her eyes widened, seeing the raw emotion on his face. "Julian, what happened?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Chloe, our contract is over." Confusion clouded her face. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather. He knows everything. He knows the marriage was a sham, that we did it for the inheritance, and he's decided I won't get anything." Julian's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Chloe's breath hitched. Oh, Julian. He looked at her, his expression bitter, yet something else flickered beneath the surface. Something that felt like goodbye. But I'll honor my promise. You'll get the money for the cafe, don't worry. His voice was distant, mechanical. Now that the deal's over, we don't need to pretend anymore. Chloe felt a coldness spread through her chest, a sharp, unexpected pain, as if his words had severed something she'd unknowingly begun to cherish. Even knowing it was a lie, a contract, she hadn't anticipated such a cold, abrupt ending, as if everything they'd shared, however fabricated, had been utterly meaningless. "So that's it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's all?" Julian looked away, his gaze fixed on some distant point, hiding the pain that flickered in his eyes. "Yes, Chloe, the contract is over. You can go on with your life, and I'll go on with mine." Chloe stood frozen, trying to absorb the finality of his words. Finally, she simply nodded, stepping back, closing the door, not looking back. And so the marriage born of a lie ended as it began, with a cold, impersonal agreement. The days that followed were desolate. Julian tried to bury himself in work, throwing himself into Vance Corp projects, but nothing felt the same. A gaping void had opened in his life, an emptiness he couldn't fill. No matter how many deals he closed, how many hours he worked, he missed Chloe. He missed their conversations, her quiet strength, the unexpected warmth of her smile. The absence was a constant ache, a gnawing loneliness that intensified with each passing day. He'd lost more than an inheritance. He'd lost her. Memories of their time together haunted him. A shared laugh, a stolen glance, her gentle touch when he was unexpectedly vulnerable. The emptiness became overwhelming. He realized with stark clarity it wasn't the inheritance he craved. It was Chloe. And in losing her, he'd lost something far more precious. He tried to convince himself the feeling would fade, a temporary infatuation. But the days turned into weeks, and the longing only deepened. He was captive to an inescapable truth. He had fallen in love with her, and now he was utterly alone. Watching the city lights from his penthouse, Julian understood. All the money, the power, the Wall Street empire, it was all meaningless. The real loss was Chloe. The empty life he now faced seemed heavier, more desolate than any lost legacy. Julian Vance, the man who lived only for work, now confronted the brutal reality that without the love he'd discovered with Chloe, he would never be truly happy. He tried to force himself back into his routine, but the void Chloe had left made everything unbearably monotonous. Every meeting, every decision, his mind drifted back to her, to their moments together, a smile, a conversation, her gentle hand in his. One day, overwhelmed, he closed his laptop, left the office early. He drove aimlessly, searching for something to fill the emptiness. But all he could do was remember George's words. George hadn't wanted a wealthy, successful grandson. He'd wanted a happy one, transformed by genuine connection, and Julian had failed. Sacrificed the only person who had ever made him feel truly alive. Driving through the city, guilt and longing coalesced into a decision. He had to win her back. Not for the contract, not for any clause, but because he genuinely wanted her, because he loved her. He U-turned, heading towards Chloe's cafe, the daily grind. The neon sign was lit, a beacon in the evening dusk. Inside, the tables were empty. Chloe sat alone at the counter, absently flipping through a ledger. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening, surprise, then confusion, then a flicker of something else. Hurt? Hope? "Julian?" Her voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, trying to organize the torrent of emotions. "Chloe, I know it might be too late, but I need to tell you everything's changed for me." Chloe looked away, a guarded caution in her eyes. "Julian, we both know this started as a lie. You wanted the inheritance, and I just wanted to save my cafe." "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But in the middle of all that lying, I found something real. I found you. And even though it started as a contract, I know now that what I feel for you is real." Chloe remained silent, her heart warring between hurt and a fragile, flickering hope. "And what makes you think we can just forget everything, start over?" Julian felt the weight of her question. Winning her back wouldn't be easy, but he knew he couldn't give up. "I'm not asking you to forget, Chloe. I'm asking for a second chance. I was wrong. I lied. But I also learned. My grandfather was right. He wanted me to change, to understand the value of true connection. And you're the only person who showed me that." Chloe kept her gaze fixed on the counter, still hesitant. You hurt me, Julian. I was starting to believe that maybe some of it was real. He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. Chloe, I don't know if I can undo what I did, but I can change what we are now. I want to be by your side, to support your dreams, to be part of your life, not as a contract, but as a man who's completely in love with you. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but she remained composed. His words resonated with a sincerity she hadn't heard before. She finally saw the man she'd glimpsed beneath the ice exterior. Julian, she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. I just wanted something real. He smiled, a genuine, heart-wrenching smile, his eyes shining with the promise of a new beginning. And I want that too. If you give me a chance, Chloe, I promise everything will be different. I just want to make you happy. Chloe took a shaky breath, the weight of the choice heavy on her heart. But looking into his eyes, she saw a vulnerability, a raw honesty she hadn't seen before. The man in front of her was different, willing to shed his control to show his heart. Finally, she nodded, a single tear escaping. Hope blossomed again. Okay, Julian, she whispered. Let's start over. But this time, no lies. Julian's smile widened, relief flooding him. He pulled her into a tight embrace, the emptiness in his chest finally, miraculously, filled. In that quiet cafe, amidst the scent of coffee and the promise of a new dawn, they knew. They were ready to build a real story, a story of second chances, of truth, and of love. Months melted into a tapestry of shared moments. Julian felt the transformation in every facet of his life. Chloe's presence illuminated everything, infusing his days with a joy he'd never known. The certainty grew, solid and unwavering. He wanted to spend forever with her. One quiet evening, dinner at Chloe's cozy apartment. Julian felt the moment arrive, perfect and inevitable. He took her hand, his gaze locking with hers, an intensity that made her breath catch. Chloe, he began, his voice soft, thick with emotion. Since you walked into my life, everything changed. I thought I had it all, but I was wrong. I had nothing until I met you. You showed me what it means to truly live, and I can't imagine my life without you. Chloe smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. She knew every word was true, echoed the feelings in her own heart. Julian reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Chloe Evans, he said, his voice trembling slightly, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for a contract, not for convenience, but for love, for everything we've built, everything we are together. Chloe gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth, tears now streaming freely. The ring sparkled in the soft light, a symbol of a love forged in the crucible of deception, yet stronger, more resilient for it. Looking into Julian's eyes, filled with love, with hope, her heart overflowed. Barely able to speak through her tears, she nodded. Yes, Julian, yes, with all my heart. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around, laughter and tears mingling in the small apartment. A symphony of joy, of relief, of love finally, truly found. Days later, Julian knew he had to share the news with George. His grandfather's recovery was slow, but he was home, surrounded by the quiet comfort of his garden. Chloe's ring nestled in Julian's pocket, a tangible symbol of his transformed life. He drove to George's house, a mix of anticipation and trepidation in his heart. He needed his grandfather's blessing. George sat on the porch, gazing at the blooming roses, a serene calm about him. He smiled as Julian approached, then noticed the gravity in his grandson's expression. He waited, patient, knowing. Grandpa, Julian began, his voice softer, more respectful than ever before. I had to come to tell you what's happened, and to ask for your forgiveness. George raised an eyebrow, a gentle curiosity in his eyes. Forgiveness, Julian? For what? Julian took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling upon him. I know. At the beginning, I failed you. The marriage with Chloe, it was a lie, a cold contract for the inheritance. I was blinded by ambition, thought that was all that mattered. But you were right, I needed someone to show me what truly living means. George remained silent, but a flicker of emotion crossed his face. He listened, allowing Julian the space to unravel his truth. I fell in love with her, Grandpa, truly, and now I can't imagine my life without Chloe. You made me realize what I chased in that inheritance. It was meaningless, without someone to share it with, and that someone is her. I wanted you to know Chloe and I are getting married, for real, and I really want you to be there. George took a deep breath, his eyes glistening. He dreamt of this moment, the day Julian would understand. "Julian," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "nothing in the world could make me happier, knowing you found someone like Chloe, someone who completes you. That's the greatest gift you could give me." Julian stepped closer, his own emotions surging, and took George's hands. "I'm so sorry for lying to you. I thought I was being clever, but I was just lost. You always wanted the best for me, and now I understand what that means." George pulled him into a firm embrace, a rare, precious gesture between them. "My boy, what matters is you found your way. Chloe is a wonderful woman, and I know you'll be very happy together. I'd be honored to be at the wedding, to see you take this step, this time with your heart." Julian smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He'd spent years building a life on material values, but now, with Chloe, with his grandfather's blessing, he felt whole. As he said goodbye, George whispered, almost like a secret, "Remember, Julian, the true legacy is the one you build with love. That's the only one that lasts." With those words etched in his heart, Julian left, a smile on his face, eager to start his real life with Chloe. The wedding day dawned, bathed in golden sunlight. Julian woke with a feeling he'd never known, a blend of joy, anticipation, and profound peace. Today, he and Chloe would be united, not by a contract, but by a sacred vow of love. Chloe, surrounded by her closest friends and family, trembled with excitement, adjusting her veil, hardly believing this was real. This union, born from deception, had blossomed into something breathtakingly authentic. This wedding, everything she'd never dared to dream of, a true celebration of love, a genuine beginning with the man she loved beyond measure. Guests filled the church, a murmur of happy anticipation rippling through the air. George, frail but radiant, sat in the front row, his gaze serene, his heart overflowing with joy. He'd witnessed his grandson's transformation, his journey from cold ambition to open-hearted love. His wish, his legacy was unfolding before his eyes. The music swelled. Julian stood at the altar, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for her. Then she appeared, radiant, ethereal, walking towards him, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. Each step was a testament to their journey, the obstacles overcome, the love forged in the crucible of lies. At the altar, Julian took Chloe's hand, his smile reflecting the depths of his love, gratitude, and reverence. Chloe returned his smile, feeling utterly safe, utterly complete in his presence. The officiant began the ceremony, but for Julian and Chloe, the world seemed to fade away. They were in their own universe, every word, every glance, echoing the weight of their shared journey. During the vows, Julian looked into Chloe's eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "Chloe, when we met, I was lost, closed off, blinded by ambition. You showed me a world I never knew existed, a world of love, of laughter, of moments that I now know are everything. You brought meaning to my life, a joy I never imagined possible. Today, I promise to love you with all that I am, to be your partner, your rock, to make every day a conscious, true choice. You are my life, my joy, and I am eternally grateful to have found you." Tears streamed down Chloe's face, her voice trembling as she spoke her vows. "Julian, you came into my life in the most unexpected way, and from the beginning, you showed me a world I never dreamed of. I've learned from you the importance of truth, of chasing what truly matters, of never giving up on love. Today, I promise to love you without reservation, to stand by your side always, to build with you a life filled with love, companionship, and endless happiness. You are the love I've always dreamed of, and I know, together, we are stronger than we could ever be alone. By the power vested in me," the officiant declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the church erupted in applause. George watched, tears streaming down his face, knowing, in that moment, the true legacy of the Vance family had been passed on. Not wealth, but the capacity to love, to build something real, something lasting. At the reception, amidst the joyous celebration, Julian and Chloe dance, lost in each other's eyes, finally home. Their smiles, their glances, their whispered words were testament to a love that had bloomed amidst lies, a love that had transformed into a deep, unbreakable bond. Surrounded by loved ones, Julian and Chloe began their new life, a life built on truth, on sincerity, on the unwavering promise of forever. George, watching from a nearby table, smiled, content. His mission was complete. He had shown Julian what truly mattered, and seeing the radiant happiness on his grandson and Chloe's faces, he knew this love, forged in fire, was destined to endure. Under the loving gaze of family and friends, Julian and Chloe embarked on their journey, a true, eternal marriage united not by contract, but by a love that would indeed last forever.